So for the first session today, we are talking about how to use the OpenDP library applications. And I present you three of our very precious developers who did wonderful software on how to, on integrating the library, from the core all the way through the data source. So Ethan Cowan is our software developer, and then Ellen is a technical lead in software and also work on a lot of Dataverse parts. And then Raman is our development manager for software. So here you go.
Hi, everyone. See a lot of familiar faces here, and we're happy to be here to actually show something we've been working on quite a while. The first thing I want to mention was just to acknowledge that, the three of us, Ellen, Ethan, and I, were building on a lot of work that was done prior. I wanted to point out, Mike and Andy presented the OpenDP library yesterday, which is, one of the core building blocks of the DP creator, the web application we're going to talk about. Prior to the three of us even starting, there was a lot of UI design and testing that went on that predated us, including, people like Audrey and Jayshree and Tanya, who did a lot of testing with data archives and a lot of had many conversations. There's a Dataverse team which has been supporting us throughout, and other people like Joshua from Microsoft, who helped us do a security audit, which at the end I'll note that we are going to continue that work in the coming months. But just to say thank you to everyone, and especially the overall program managers and the executive committee for kind of giving us the space to work. So the agenda today is, why use the OpenDP library in an application? And then I was going to talk about Dataverse, the use case that we've been focusing on. We're going to give a demo and then talk about some of our future plans. So just to start out and kind of reorient, Mike and Andy gave a great demo and presentation yesterday on the OpenDP library. And just to point out again that the OpenDP library is meant to be modular. And it can be installed as easily as a Python package in a notebook for someone that wants to try using it within 5 minutes. But then it can also be embedded as part of a bigger application. And I want to mention too that the pip install that you might use to use OpenDP for a notebook is the same pip install that we actually use for the application. So there's no extra magic going on in our use of the OpenDP library, other than we get to talk to Mike and Andy on Slack. All right, so the question, why use OpenDP library in an application? And the real answer to this is, we kind of have this person who says, I know my data set and what DP can do for me, but I don't have time to learn the programming and math involved. And actually, these images are a bit representative of what's going on in terms of, on the bottom left, there's some of the code that you might use when you're using OpenDP library to calculate a mean. And on the right-hand side is sort of our conceptualization of that within the library. So it's kind of a translation of code to UI, which we'll demonstrate later on. And kind of pushing the idea further, differential privacy is difficult. And OpenDP has sort of lowered the barrier to using it. And we want to lower that barrier further. And kind of also in our use case are people that, they might take the time to learn differential privacy, but they might not use it regularly. So we're thinking of like someone who maybe creates a data set and wants to then create some differentially private statistics. But maybe this person creating the data set is a researcher who has spent months gathering all this data, and they're only going to use differential privacy in the final weeks of their process. And they might use it again, but only after the next data set is created. So if a quick show of hands for people who know what Dataverse is, if you don't mind just saying something. So it's a lot of people here, and those people I'm going to probably bore for a few more minutes. But for those who aren't oriented to it, Dataverse is software that was originated here at Harvard. It started in 2007, and it's an open source data repository. It's open to everyone in terms of if you're a researcher who wants to deposit or curate a data set, or you just want to kind of, you're a student, or again, a researcher who wants to look at data. And it's quite amazing. It's being used by thousands of people every single month. As I noted here, there's 69 installations worldwide. And what makes it different than other data repositories is actually there's an institutional guarantee that it'll be running for the long term. I think there's some kind of legendary story that, if you wanted to restore some of the old Harvard buildings woodwork, they have a forest that they planted, 70 years ago to do that. And sort of in a digital way, there's a guarantee that, once all of us are gone from Harvard and including or kind of moved on, that the repository will be still there. And thanks to Gary King and the IQSS team for kind of setting that up in that organizational governance. So what makes Dataverse special is, it's sort of like a clothing shop or a data shop. You can quickly search and look at metadata about a data set. And if it looks good, you can actually sort of, walk in the store and see if it fits. You can download your data right there or preview it online. However, this is where differential privacy starts to come in. There's at least 10,000 restricted files on the Harvard Dataverse. And I pointed out there's actually 69 Dataverse installations. So only on one installation, there's already 10,000 files that are restricted. And these are often the most interesting files. They deal with, confidential data, whether it's the, medical or age of the people involved or other items. And, in this image on the right, the restricted data is kind of like, you can't really get a look at it. It's, you might know the name of the data set and a description, but not much more. And, you have a researcher that kind of looks at that name and description and says, hey, it looks like a great data set. I'd like to know more about it. And then when we say, yeah, you can talk to that person for permission, you may end up in this sort of like bureaucratic, apologies to data user agreement managers who run really tight shops. But sometimes, we've heard stories like, oh, I need to sign an IRB to get this data set. And the person might take months to actually get access to the data set. And when they finally see it, it's like a bad piece of clothing. Maybe it's the wrong color or it doesn't fit right. And it was a huge waste of time. So our idea with OpenDP is that, we built this web application, which you can launch from Dataverse, generate differentially private statistics, and put those statistics back into Dataverse. So if you're looking at a restricted file, you have a chance to at least look in the window and get an idea of what the data is about. And this, as it's written on the slide, has a potential to unlock, interest and research opportunity on these, these data sets that people took tens of thousands of hours to make and are really valuable. And so a more, one of the early use cases we're looking at in the coming months is the Australian Data Archive, which itself is a Dataverse installation. So the use case is the federal government on a regular basis deposits something called the HILDA survey into the Dataverse. So it's household income and labor dynamics in Australia. And some of that data is public, you can see it, and some is restricted. You really have no idea what's in it. So kind of our idea is, what if there's a data curator of the Australian Data Archive could use DP Creator to publish, differentially private metadata. And what if that metadata has a new variable and some economists who are studying labor dynamics in the area want to look at it? They're interested in this data set. Now, instead of, kind of going through the process of signing data use agreements, they could get an initial idea of what's in the data by looking at the public differentially private metadata. In this image here, we haven't seen it yet. It's dancing, jumping economists, and we do hope to see something in real life in the future. So without too much more going through this, the DP Creator application, we're hoping to provide a guide experience for curators and subject matter experts. Your data and you want to make differentially private statistics, but you may not be doing that often. And in some of the ways the application works is by recommending privacy parameters. And then as a kind of a regular web application, it handles identity and access management and it helps like manage the public differentially private releases. This is another quick overview, but you're about to see it in person. Someone can, log into Dataverse with their private data set, launch the DP creator. There's sort of like a hot potato kind of moment here where the DP creator does keep a copy of the private data set and also profiles the data. And this exists from anywhere from a few hours to currently we have it up to 3 days before DP creator sort of erases its memory of that data. But currently there is a point where DP creator has to touch the data. I just want to mention that. And then once you make something on the DP creator, which we're calling a differentially private release, it's then deposited back in the Dataverse where it's available to the public. So without much further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ellen, who's going to give a demo. Thank you. Well, Ellen, you might be on mute still. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. So as Raman said, the use case for this version of DP Creator is a Dataverse user who has some data that's restricted, and they want to create DP statistics that are publicly available so that other researchers can get more information for their data and decide if it's appropriate for them, and then either go through the process of getting access to the data. So in this scenario, I'm a Dataverse owner, and I've uploaded this file to Dataverse. You can see it's demographic information about individuals. And I want to create, I'm an owner, so I can see this data, but if it's restricted, other users wouldn't be able to see this data. They would just see general information, a description, but they wouldn't see this table, this preview. So what I'm going to do as Dataverse owner is go and access the DB Creator tool. So this is a test version of Dataverse that has a DB Creator tool configured. So here I am now at the homepage for DB Creator. And as Raman said, it's meant for a user that is aware of differential privacy, but is not an expert in it necessarily. So we start off by providing a lot of background information about DB Creator, what it does, who should use this tool and why, and more information about differential privacy as well. And once the user reads through these tips, they can either log in or create an account. Here for the demo, I've already created an account, so I'm going to log in. Created the terms of use. And now I get to the main starting page where DB Creator shows you the information that it's gotten already from Dataverse, and we can start the process of going through and choosing the DP statistics to create. So it's a multi-step process, and the first thing we do in DP Creator is make sure that the data set is appropriate for differential privacy. And if it turns out it's not appropriate, the DB Creator will let you know. So for example, is your data set private? If you say no, it will say, well, this data set shouldn't be used. So you can go back, and if you answered incorrectly, change your answer. And then the next question is asking about the level of restriction that you need for your data. What kind of harm would it cause if it were released? And depending on how you answer that question, DP Creator will recommend an epsilon or privacy budget for your data set. So I'll say, wouldn't cause material harm, but we want to keep it confidential. And we also require that the data set contains only one individual per row. So now we can continue. And at this point, DP Creator has downloaded that temporary version of the data set and run it through a profiler to generate this table of variables and variable types. And what the user needs to do here is to add more information about the variables in order to generate the DP statistics. And those will be used as bounds for numerical variables, for example. And it's kind of, it's not obvious how this information should be added. So we have a lot of tips at the top of this page for how to add these bounds. So it should be bounds that a knowledgeable person might estimate without looking at the data, because if you add the exact bounds, you might be leaking privacy data. So for example, it says with age, it should be a reasonable person might say a min of 0 and a max of 100. So we'll do that. And we'll also do income and add a reasonable max and min, maybe. And if there are categories in the data, it would also ask you to supply categories. So the next thing we do is we answer a couple more questions about the data set in order to determine the epsilon and how the statistics will be calculated. So is it from a sample from a larger population? We'll say no. Can the number of observations in your data set be made public? We'll say no. And now at this point, DB Creator has recommended epsilon for your data set based on your input. There's also a delta, which is another privacy parameter that is used for Gaussian noise, which we're not doing currently. So it's set to 0, but sometime in the future that might be appropriate for your data set. And it also has a default significance level, which controls the accuracy of your statistic. And the more accurate your statistic is, the more privacy more of your privacy budget you'll be using. So now we're going to create our statistics. We'll say we want the mean of age, and we want a count of income. And see that the epsilon has been evenly distributed among the variables in your statistics. And you can choose to override that with these edit options if you want to use more epsilon for a specific variable. So now we have our statistics, and I'm going to continue. And now here we have a page where we ask you, are you sure? Because once you generate your statistics, you're using your privacy budget. So you say yes. And because our data set is so small, it's already been calculated. But depending on the data set, it may take some time, and you may have to wait for an email to let you know that your data has been, your statistics have been calculated. So from here, we can go to the details page. And what we see here is a summary of the differentially private statistics that were calculated for you. So we have a mean age that was calculated at 44.4, and using that significance level, we have a probability of 95%. It's within this number of units, and our count is 10,004. And this was we know there are actually 10,000 rows in the data set, so that's relatively accurate. That's within our bounds. So in addition to the summary, we also can see an outline of the release data showing more information, the delta, the bounds, the epsilon, etc. And this is actually a visual representation of the JSON file that's generated for you. And also, in addition to JSON, we'll be generating PDF files and other file types. So at this point, the DB Creator also is depositing your differentially private statistics back into your Dataverse data set so that the users can see that. So if we go back to Dataverse, now when users who don't have access to the data click on Access File, they have this option of looking at differentially private statistics. So here we just have the example of the JSON one, and we can see that it's the JSON data is here. So that walks you through the Dataverse DP Creator scenario. And now I'm going to hand it over to Ethan so he can talk more about the technical details involved in DP Creator and the next step in our development. So share.
Great, thanks so much, Ellen. Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. And thanks to Raman and Ellen for great leadership on this project, and also for this excellent demo, which really, I think, concisely encapsulates our vision for what this service will look like. I'm going to speak briefly on some technical notes on how this service is hosted and our thoughts on the infrastructure, as well as our short and long-term future plans. So first, regarding technical notes, we developed this from the beginning to be able to deploy with Kubernetes, the container service. And so locally, it's using Docker Compose. So each individual service has its own Docker file, and it can be brought up with a single command. That's really nice because it does dependency management really nicely, and it means that we don't have to worry about differences in configuration on our laptops and things like that. It's just you pull down the repo, you run Docker Compose up build, and you have the service up in about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on build speed. There's a Vue.js front end, a PostgreSQL database for storage, and the back end of the application is written mainly in the Django REST framework, which is an addition to the Django web library, which allows for kind of an abstraction layer of RESTful interactions over different types of models. And then, of course, the heart of the service is the OpenDP library, which we've been working with closely in order to provide these statistics, DP statistics. And our plan is to be adding statistics as new functions become available. We can create these function composition chains for different types of statistics. We're also going to be using Dataverse's upcoming Secure External Tools API for secure data transfer. And we're planning on doing additional usability reviews with Dataverse data curators. So that would be the use case of, I'm a data owner or a curator, and I want to include this data to be available for DP analysis. What does that workflow look like, and how can we make it easier and more intuitive for those users? So our development plans moving forward from around now until November 2021, our plan is to release the service with a demo Dataverse. So this means refining the end-to-end experience. Our goal is to have the DP release that Ellen just showed you. That would be the statistics, that JSON object, things like that, actually deposited back into Dataverse, meaning that if I run a DP statistic on Dataverse and it gets deposited in Dataverse rather, and it gets deposited back to Dataverse, and then others can see that release, so that once Epsilon is spent, those statistics can be viewable by other people without having to rerun it and potentially exceed the budget. Also, we're talking about doing single DP releases per data set for the next couple of months. And then also, as I mentioned before, training, documentation, and onboarding. So this is continuing user testing. Our goal is to make this as intuitive and understandable as possible for new users, to make the learning curve as easy as possible and get people up and running with DP data analysis on Dataverse. And then longer term future would be integration with existing Dataverses. These would be production Dataverses, not demo. We want to do a comprehensive security audit on the DP Creator system. We want to expand the available statistics. So we're open to researchers giving us suggestions on what the most in-demand and useful statistics would be. And then right now we're supporting a single DP release. We do in the future want to support multiple DP releases. So if one person spends part of the budget and another person spends another part of the budget, both of those releases can be available to others. And then on the developer side, we want a more comprehensive deployment guide and documentation. We understand that there will come a time when we are not the only ones running local instances of this, and we want the deployment process and the documentation to be as comprehensive as possible. And then coming soon, so this would be things like analyst workflow and learning mode. So analyst workflow means allowing the depositor to specify parameters like epsilon and delta, and then the analyst can work within those bounds. The option to modify min-max values and categories in the data during the analysis step, and then also restricting the analysis to particular users. So data owners can go on Dataverse and say, I want to allow DP statistics to be generated, but only by the following user accounts. And that way they can restrict the universe of possible users to people that they know or trust. We're also exploring the options of graphical interfaces. So for things like DP histograms and other visualizations, we'd like to have interactive graphs. You can imagine a library like a D3 or something like that we can add to the service so that people can do more fine-grained filtering and data analysis. And then finally, there's what we're calling learning mode, which would be a completely separate deployment and installation of the service that would run on public data sets, on a certain subset of public data sets for educational purposes. And the goal there would be to quickly gain an intuitive understanding of what DP is. And the benefit of using public data, for example, the PUMS data that we just used in this demonstration, is that you can run a non-DP statistic on it and also a DP statistic, and you can show the difference and explain, we generated Laplace noise and we sampled from this distribution. Here's the value that was sampled. Here's what was added to it as a simple example. And then now you can get this kind of intuitive understanding of here's what's going on in the back end, and here's the general concepts of DP. And then the user base for this would be kind of twofold. You'd have your data professionals, so people in industry, government, academia who are doing applied data analysis, wanting to understand these principles of DP without having to write code from scratch. And then also there's a need for students in classes to learn about DP in an applied context. So this would be useful in both of those cases. And then on the installation level, this would be an installation with much less strict security requirements. And if anyone has questions about that, we're happy to discuss. This is all kind of our future planning stages at this point, which takes me to, we are now at Q&A.
Yeah, please feel free to enter questions in the chat or to simply raise your hand.
Yeah, I'm checking the chat now.
Yeah, I saw a question from Sonia asking if this is integrated into Harvard Dataverse, and do we need permission from depositors to allow this to be used on their data sets? Raman put in brief answers. Maybe it's good to talk on voice. So
yeah, it's I could give an answer, and Ellen and Ethan could jump in too, and even I think Tanya's on this call. One of the main things is just communicating what differential privacy is, and I think John Abowd yesterday alluded to that he had these communication experts help train him to explain differential privacy to like legislators and other people. So in our case, we've tried to put a lot of help information within the DP creator itself, but we kind of keep coming to the conclusion that may not be enough. Coming kind of off the street data curator, it may not be enough just to read that help information, and then we definitely need some kind of like either ideally, like some direct training with them to kind of lead them through the process with test data sets, or even like a kind of short training curriculum to do that, so that we feel confident that they know enough about differential privacy to kind of go through the process and make intelligent choices. That's a bit of an answer. I mean, in the application itself, when Ellen demonstrated it, you can see we try to use very human language questions or questions asked about your data set. And behind the scenes, actually the privacy parameters are getting adjusted. I hope that helps. But I think that's going to come out more in our testing. How much DP do you need to know to make informed decisions?
No, that's very helpful. And I actually can see, at least for the Harvard Dataverse community, our Dataverse demos that if we tend to do them every month, we get quite a crowd. So I can see that, talking about this being a tool in the Harvard Dataverse would generate quite a community that would be interested in the additional demos and asking questions so they better understand it. So we're very happy to help you guys test that and test a training module for your regular user if that's what you need.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. We will be talking very soon. So.
Thanks, Sonia, for the question and Raman for the answer. The next question is from Mona Chitnis. What types of pre-processing are needed before data is ready for DP queries?
Well, that's a great question. There's a fair. It depends. It depends on the data set. We do ask questions along the way, like, is there only one individual per row of the data information? But I think that's also going to be kind of like, we'll try to give some guidelines about what in that training about what is a proper data set. There are things like missing values or incorrect values that the application is actually designed to take care of. I don't know if you saw at the end of Ellen's, or when in Ellen, like mid demo, when she was creating like a differentially private mean, it asked, what should I do with missing values? And kind of on our short-term roadmap, we also have, adding like transformations to variables. Like if instead of just the mean of income, what if you want to get the log of income and do something with that? Please follow up with me if that's not specific enough. And I could also answer Katie's question on here, which was, we mentioned creating DP metadata. And she's asking, are those DP statistics that Ellen was showing? And the answer is yes. We may have, we use that sort of interchangeably within the presentation, but basically we're thinking you're creating this bundle of DP statistics, and we're calling that a DP release. So yes is the answer to that question. Plan to support synthetic data generation in DP Creator tool. That is definitely a goal given our, the demands. We haven't put that on a roadmap yet, but it has been under discussion.
Yeah, it's a great question too. It's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, and I'll let like Ellen or Ethan answer the next questions if that's. Or I can ask the question, going back to Ellen's presentation, how are the epsilons being generated for each of the harms?
Yeah, do we maybe want to show that view again? Because where we're talking about levels of risk.
Sure, I can show that.
Oh wait, I'm sharing the screen. I can actually just go back, right? Oh no, I can't. Okay, I'm gonna stop.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a really nice mapping from the front end into the default epsilon values.
Yes, let's see if we can go back. Right. So these three questions are based on your answer. We basically have a specific epsilon value based on each question. So it's 1 if you answer this question. I believe it's 0.25 if you answer this question, and it gets small, and then it's less for this third question. If it's public, we say your data is inappropriate.
We kick you out.
Yeah, and if it's fair harm, we also say your data is inappropriate for our DB creator.
Yeah,
that's what we're doing currently.
Yeah, I thought it would be nice to show there's a direct one-to-one mapping between these radio buttons and our epsilon values.
Yeah.
Nothing mysterious going on.
Just wanted to add that for these epsilon values, this is just for this application, for users to use these epsilon values as a guardrail. And then, in terms of exactly what epsilon you should set for exactly what kind of data set in your use case, it's still an open research question. And then we will, one of the working groups we're setting up, we are having tomorrow has epsilon values as one of the focus topics. So stay tuned for tomorrow.
Yeah, there's one more question on if it's available for external users. If not, how do we request access? So it's not deployed yet, and we're still in the stages of making it available to the general Dataverse users. What I would mention, I'm not sure by external users, if you mean users who aren't interacting with Dataverse data, our plan is to have a repo called, tentatively called OpenDP Commons, which will have a lot of these functions in a Python interface. So for example, running a DP mean will be like a Python function, and you can use those functions to generate DP statistics from other data sources. I wasn't sure if that's what you meant by external, but some of these functions will be available at a code level, just not through the browser.
Yeah, I can also mention, I think the coding behind it, like it's modular in terms of what data set is being used. So a lot of this is oriented to Dataverse, but behind the scenes, we also have what we're calling just, you're uploading your own file to the application and trying it out. And we plan to have other ways to use other data. So including Ethan at the end was mentioning this warning mode, which could be a way of simply using it. I guess please follow up with us either here or afterward in terms of the external users, because we can definitely talk about specific cases.
Yeah, and we should also mention that the code for DP Creator is open source, so we can also walk through how pieces are working together, and if you want to create something for an external use case that does something similar, that's also a real possibility.
Yeah, I
see. Right now about,
I see Salil has his hand up. So,
okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just
Salil, please go ahead.
Yeah, a great presentation, and just to follow up on that question, I think Ethan, you were mentioning how it would be set up as a service. So eventually, do we see that if someone has a data set, they will be able to use the service to kind of upload their data set to whatever, even a temporary Dataverse or something, to use DP Creator to create a set of DP releases, and then just take that file and publish it in their own way? Is that something that would be a possibility?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So that's one possibility that we've discussed, which is if someone wants to mimic all of this functionality without going through a Dataverse installation, they could potentially mimic the entire system locally. The other is that we have talked about other types of data connections. So potentially if someone wanted to host the data on a different service, and then locally we could run something that pulls it from whatever it is, a Postgres database, AWS bucket, something like that. And we can run through the same process that way. But ultimately, yes, I would view this as a platform for people to do these DP releases without having to create computation chains themselves in Python, without having to run a notebook, to be able to just spin it up, run it, and even to run it within an office and be collaborative and have their own instance running, without having to write code from scratch and things like that. Yep.
Great, thanks.
The next question, and Annie, please stop us if we're starting to.
Yeah, I'm just trying to do a quick time check here. Are you guys okay to stay on and answer a few more questions?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Limitations on data size. That's a good question. I mean, right now we're kind of working with Dataverse size data, which can get fairly big, but it's not a big data application yet. What we're doing right now is like we're using separate when we're collecting the statistics and sort of validating them. That's like a kind of it's a pretty small operation. And then when we actually touch the data, we run that in a separate process. So the hope is as we work with like Andy and Mike is once we get to processing bigger data, we can sort of, we could work our external pipeline to work with bigger and bigger data. So the answer is not yet. I think that's to be exact. Question, can I write more detailed technical questions to someone via email? Is there a way I can download something to play with? Yes.
Oh, I'm speaking. Yeah, I spoke with him in private direct message, so we've swapped
great,
emails.
Great. Yeah. How does different epsilon values impact the final statistics values? That's a great question. So when Ellen was showing the end result of the release, it basically was giving some kind of confidence interval saying, there's like 95% chance that this value is within X amount of the actual value. So like the mean might be within 1.2 points of the actual mean. So the epsilon, like what you pick for epsilon values are going to impact the accuracy. And seeing how that works is really one of the big motivations for us to kind of get this out into like a learning mode. So you can work with actual data and compare, the real statistics versus the DP statistics and kind of get a feel for how this works before kind of going through a longer process.
Yeah, I think one of the best things we can do for learning mode is in that selection process, make it more obvious that when you select in those radio buttons, what you're really doing is setting epsilon, because it's obvious to us because we built it, but from the outside, it's not immediately necessarily apparent, especially in a learning mode, that when you make that selection, you're actually defining your default epsilon and how that relates to the noise. But that's also a good question.
Yes, I think we're close to the end of our time, but we're very happy to answer any questions that might arise in the future. And we will be deploying shortly. And actually, the demo was done on a live deployment. We just want to do some more checking before it's really out there. So yeah,
you guys so far have gotten most questions. So good work on the DP creator. So for the audience, if you have any more questions, info@opendp.org or GitHub site, github.com/opendp. So these are the two quickest ways to reach us. All right, we're gonna take a break now and then we will come back at 12.
Great, thanks so much
for everyone.